without any further ado, I want to introduce our next panel, which is our part of our plenary. And I want to start off by asking an amazing friend, colleague, a champion of this work, who has muscled hospitals, has muscled, sorry, it's my throat, who has muscled the medical profession to really come to the table to better understand what CVI really is and the impact that trauma has in our communities. She's done an amazing work. She continues to grow, sustain, and I am really eager for this next panel because I think there's a lot that we could take away when we think about collaboration, building on evidence. And this is one of the best places that we have really good research to talk about the impact of violence. So without any further delay, I want to introduce my good friend, Fatima, who is the executive director of the Hobby.
Hey there, everyone. How you doing? All right. Mayor Johnson, come on. That was beautiful. And Angel, thank you for that keynote. We've got an electric set of speakers today. So I just want to thank the Department of Justice, Eddie, your leadership and vision. There's nothing like being with family, right? And we are all connected in such powerful ways. I'm excited to moderate a panel where we're going to be talking about the power of narrative. And I was asked to share a few slides just to get us started. And so I'm going to do that. Let's see if this works. Okay, this is our panel. Okay. So what is narrative, right? Well, let's start there. We have this really great quote from the Color of Change. Narrative is the unspoken beliefs and ideas about the world that show up in our writing and our storytelling, right? Fundamental to this is understanding the relationship between narrative and power. So narrative defines what we imagine is possible and why, what we aspire to become and how, and whether we feel we have power with, over, or none at all, right, with others. And that, I think, is pretty critical. There is so much power in this room because there are so many stories of what the work is. For those of you who are working on the ground every single day, not only your own personal experience, what you bring to the work, but what you see day in and day out, engaging with clients and participants and patients, it can set the world on fire, right? That's what we're aiming to do. And for us to sustain our work, we got to bring people with us, people who've never heard of CVI, don't understand what that work is. We have to bring them with us so that people will demand this everywhere, right? That's where we're aiming, and it takes something to do that. And we need to collect our stories together. So your story matters. And I will share personally, many of you know this, some of you might be able to observe, I'm pregnant with our first child. Thank you. So I'm bringing a little Black boy into this world in July, God willing, and we can't wait. We can't wait. Children are being born today, every day, entering a world and conditions based on a history of disinvestment and trauma and violence that we are seeking to transform and bring peace, healing, love, connection to our communities. We have so much yet to do, and so the opportunity to share and stitch our work together is inspiring. So I just want to continue to thank you, and especially thank our frontline workers for all the work you do to bring peace. You are changing lives today and for the future. So thank you on behalf of my unborn child. Thank you for your work. We love you. So now we're going to get a little technical. And I so appreciate that we're having this panel after both hearing this amazing morning session about data and research and how to connect that to our actual work and community, and then this incredible narrative work shared by, again, Angel, and even the mayor, that there's this interplay between the stories we have collectively and how we understand its impact on all the audiences we need to impact. So I want to talk about that. And there's this, there's a kind of research, communications research, that actually starts to test these messages that begin to help us understand, are the stories we're telling landing for people who may not understand or know about us yet, right? How do we understand sentiment out in the world, right? So it helps give us some insights. But, right, this is the warning, right? This research is very, very sensitive to changes in wording. It's not definitive, right? So you see results and they can change the very next moment. There's so much happening in the world, right? Ideas and beliefs are shifting every single day, right? So, even when we poll people, it's only capturing a moment in time, okay? So all of the caveats, right? I'm giving you all of the caveats just to share one more slide. And that is just to give you a little bit of a sense of what that kind of research might offer us, in hopes that it inspires you to have some conversations about things we might do together, projects we might launch together to understand the impact of our story out in the world. Then I'm going to bring the panel up. So I'm not going to go through this tons, but I just wanted to share that the Javi worked in partnership with Data for Progress and our community to put together a survey. It was a nationally representative poll taking a look at different messages around community violence intervention, and particularly in hospital-based violence intervention as a part of it. And one of the things we found that was really, really powerful is, not surprisingly, if you tell people community violence intervention works, right, that it's effective at impacting and transforming communities, those messages are powerful, they are compelling, they stick. So this first chart, you see the very first bar line, that blue line, you see how it's bigger than the red line? People often said that was the most convincing message. And that was true across the political spectrum. That was true Black, brown, otherwise, white, that people saw that when you explained to them what CVI does, they were compelled. They found it to be incredibly powerful. And there were other messages. I'm just going to share a few more about the economic power of CVI, not the workers, right? Building an incredible workforce, and to support participants with getting connected to their own economic lives, either through directly supporting cash transfers or job creation. I especially love this one, the next one about community. Messages around we as a community coming together to heal and transform others was also a powerful message. So lots for us to learn about this. And again, a fixed moment in time, a lot more to unpack. Please find me if you want to know more about this sort of information. If you are interested in doing this kind of research, I think we need to do a lot more of it, and a lot more of it together, and amplify the stories you have and make sure that we can collectively have the impact that we seek to have. So thank you so much. We're going to go switch this now to video, and I'm going to invite my panelists to come on up, and we're going to continue the story about what this looks like, what narrative and messaging looks like locally in a number of communities. So I'm going to invite my panelists to come on up. Let's have a conversation. We have a very incredible panel before us. So I want to just give you each an opportunity to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney Scott, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm the strategic director for our community safety and wellness initiative, Safe, Hopeful, Healthy, and a senior advisor to the mayor for her community revitalization initiatives.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is D'Angelo Harris Rosa. I serve as the Deputy Director for the Office of Violence Prevention and also the founder of Voices of Power.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jami Hodge, and I have the privilege and honor of serving as Executive Director at Equal Justice USA. We're a national organization that works at the intersection of criminal justice, racial justice, and public health.
Beautiful, powerful, thank you. Yes. Thanks, each of you, for your work. Okay, so we're a field that's comprised of a lot of different stakeholders, right? Some of you who are in government, various role practitioners, policymakers, advocates, researchers, and we're all united in supporting healing and transformation and reducing violence in our communities, right? I want to ask you what it's like for you to talk about CVI locally, right? How is it for you to do that? Does the message land? Like, are people getting it, or is it challenging for people to understand? And what do you do about that? How do you handle that? And say a little bit more about your programmatic work in this area.
Absolutely. So landing on the messages, it was such a reality check to see the slide that you shared and what people resonate with and what they don't, and that changes based upon them and their own beliefs. So for Safe, Hopeful, Healthy, we started this initiative in 2020 through CARES Act funding. And a lot of our legislators did not understand the programming. They thought it was a defund the police movement. They thought it was anti-law enforcement, and it was completely the opposite. And then we had our community side that was used to a government that may have put $250,000 to $500,000 per year in community initiatives. So when they saw that these resources were coming, no one really believed that it was capable. But we had a willing partner, Ms. Sateria Tate Alexander and Jazzica Matthews, who were both in this room. Sateria stood up and was one of our first community agencies to say, I'll do the work. She was personally known as an advocate in the community. The work that she had done herself in talking about disinvested agencies and communities in our city let her be one of the chief ambassadors for that work. And then even with my own story, which sometimes I was afraid to tell, walking into the mayor's office in 2018, my prior history, I managed music labels and worked in community engagement. So I had my own lived experiences. So Jazzica joined our team working in healing and trauma. So the mayor put together this powerhouse team of community and government. And we had to work to figure out how we wanted to navigate. And each one of us became community ambassadors in how we tell that story. I think what's important in shifting the narrative is understanding that despite where your position may be or how good your intentions may be, it's not about what you want to take in. I wrote down Angel's quote where he said, I'm not here to change the world, I'm here to serve the world. And that really resonated because service is about being what the community needs you to be at that time. And standing in the government seat, I had to learn that I was there to be an advocate for a community. So there are days where community may not be my best friend. There's days where government may not be my best friend. And then coming in as a civilian in a law enforcement space to say, hey, everybody move around, let's make space for community safety. You have to learn what narratives work in each room to get the job done. And you have to be rooted firmly in that. So I think that's some of the things that we've done in Baton Rouge.
Thank you.
So just to piggyback off what you talked about, healing and transformation, especially when you're trying to shift the narrative, is that narratives kind of don't work overnight. And I think when we talk about trauma, we want our story to be based on trauma, but our story shouldn't end with trauma. That shouldn't be our journey. That shouldn't be our finish. And for us to really become more impactful in this work, when I was looking into this initiative of Voices of Power, I noticed that was a huge problem statement when we were talking about CVI. And the number one thing is that typically there's not a lot of broadcasting or platforms to market about what we do. The only time people get informed about what we do is because there's a lot of credible messaging, there's boots on the ground, but when you look at it from a different perspective lens, we don't really have a platform to discuss what our shared ideas and best of practices look like. The number one thing I also know is that if it bleeds, it reads. So when someone gets shot, they're gonna play that story nonstop. But we don't understand the solutions that are going into where we can be able to create more of effective change, because typically when someone is interviewing us, it's only for 5 to 10 seconds. And the third thing I noticed is that we don't even have a public forum to discuss these shared ideas as well, because typically when I go to town hall meetings, I always get criticized for it, because I always say, who's in here 16 and up? No one raises their hand. Who's in here 45 and up? When no one raises their hand. Who's in here 65 and up? Everyone raises their hand. But when it comes to talking about the youth, there's no youth for us to really address the issue. So when I looked at Voices of Power, what it really is an innovative approach to advance public education and the discourse around CVI when it comes to reimagine what public safety could look like. And the biggest things that I wanted to do is I noticed that my time spent in the CVI Leadership Academy, thank you to Dr. Chico and everybody else in the room who gave me that opportunity, is that there was a lot of intentionality and embodiment within our work. And through the practice of our storytelling, we were able to change the mindsets and the narrative of the viewpoints on how we looked at our own personal narratives. And what I wanted to do was to create a platform in order for funders, law enforcement, credible messengers, the youth to come together and really share some of their similarities and to remove the false narratives, remove the adversarial conflicts that we can't work with law enforcement, because to be quite honest, there's a lot of similarity in our work. We want to save Black and brown lives from not being shot. We want to do community empowerment. And the number one thing is we all want to address a lot of quality of life issues within our neighborhoods. So by doing so, one of the things I noticed is that we have to be more culturally sound into how CVI program is being done. And in order for to do that, we have to start talking about positive messaging, because there's not a lot of positive messaging that we see within this work sometimes, because we always get pictured that, oh, the programs are working, but what is the narrative that you guys are trying to create out of it? Are you trying to create about public safety? Are you trying to diffuse from not working with the police? Are you trying to say that youth are the problem? No, collectively, we all can come together. And in order for us to do that, we have to have a platform to talk about this where we're able to remove the formality of professionalism, to have real radical honesty and conversations and dialogue with one another, because that's what truly really matters.
Wow, thank you.
So for us, our work really, narrative really ties with organizing for us. And our organization really started with our organizing work primarily in the anti-death penalty space. We did that for 2 decades, really, before we came into this building community safety space. But the strategy in both areas is the same in how we did that early death penalty work and how we began to change the narrative, because back in the early 2000s, 80% of people thought the death penalty was an appropriate thing. And thankfully, we've come so far since then. But the way that was done was by centering the voices of those who were most impacted. So our organizing was primarily with Black murder victim family members. And by uplifting their voices and having their perspectives be front and center is how we were able to shift that narrative. And one piece of that is really understanding just across all punishment, not just our death penalty, but all of our excessive punishment. And so much of what we do is done in the name of this is how we get justice for victims. Like we do this punishment, our obsession with punishment in this country is very much done in the name of victims. And so being able to organize with victims, family members, and now in our building community safety work, those who are victims of violence, is really how we begin to shift that narrative and understand, like, redefining terms like justice. What does justice mean? What does justice mean for them? That justice is more than punishment, that justice is, as we define it, safety, healing, accountability that actually repairs. And so the work that we're doing now is really we come around our frontline grassroots partners who are the ones doing the work on the front lines. We try to be extra hands and feet. And one of those ways is by also having some access to being able to change messaging and put messaging out through communications. I love the last part of the slide that Fatima had up earlier that said that messages are trees in the narrative forest. So a lot of our work is how do we help our frontline partners plant different trees and get the messages out of their work, whether that's through blogs, whether that's through media pieces. We will ghostwrite it, and help shape it for you, help get it placed so that we can plant those different messages. And then also important in changing that narrative for us is that we've got to also uproot the false trees, the false messages. And so a big part of this is really helping people understand that the things that we claim keep us safe, that this obsession with punishment is what is keeping us safe, is false. And there's a lot of data to support that, but people don't know it. You know, if you have the conversation with the average person on the street and they believe, you know, there's an overwhelming sort of saturation in media of anything that has to do with violence, as has been said by D'Angelo and others, there's already this belief that things are, you know, violence is higher than it always is. The belief is always that it's higher than it is. But then that if you talk to the average person, that what the answer to that is they believe that punishment, you know, more mandatory minimums, more police, more prison sentences, longer prison sentences is what's going to get us to safety. So we have a lot of work to do with uprooting and being able to give the data, give the answers, show that actually, no, that hasn't made us safe, so that we can then plant those newer messages. And that's a lot of our work, is helping our partners do that.
Really powerful. And thank you for each of your work. It's incredibly powerful. D'Angelo, I'm going to come back to you because you know that moment where you're in a room and you're saying, okay, how many of you are under 45? And I'm connecting this to Jalen earlier, talking about interrupters and the age difference. That has been a growing theme. How do we engage young people in this? Not only narratives about violence, but also narratives about being a part of the solution. And so I want to just return to this, and I'll come to you, Courtney, next. But you know, how do we think about engaging young people in narrative change work? Like, what does that look like, and what role does like digital engagement play in those sorts of opportunities?
Sure. So I think when it comes to narrative work, it has to do a lot with storytelling. And I think that we come to the realization with the youth is that they want us to rewrite their story for them. And sometimes we always can't, because we have to take a little bit step back to understand what they need. But in order for us to change that public perception and that narrative for them, we have to equip them with the tools, knowledge, and research for them to understand what CVI really is about. And currently right now with the youth, we have to realize that we live in a digital community and we live in a digital culture. And right now, the youth want their voices to be heard equally, but they have a hard time trying to connect with others because of what they see currently going right now on different media platforms. And that's because a lot of these influencers are not really giving them positive messaging, but they're lowering their self-esteem. And the biggest thing is that when we look at certain media platforms that talk about our work, or the influencers who are talking about it, it depicts nothing about negative messaging, it depicts nothing about homicides and shootings, and it doesn't show anything about what the work is truly about. And I think the youth right now want to lean on us to come to us for our advice and for our inspiration, our motivation, because right now they are the subject X matters for what the work is how the work is being done. I mean, they're relying on their peers to connect with them more than they're relying on us. So for order for us to create a platform for them on a digital scale, we have to allow their testimonies to be heard. You know, when we're speaking at certain meetings, we have to make sure youth is present. When we're on news coverage and we're talking about the work that we're doing, we have to make sure youth is there talking about what they want to see, their concerns and challenges. Even when we're going to certain town hall meetings, like I say all the time, we want to make sure a youth voice is being heard so they're able to amplify and connect and leverage their voice with others so that they're able to come in and get the work done on themselves, especially on boots on the ground. Because when you think about the narrative itself, we have to pick the narrative for the youth that they're nothing but troublesome, they're nothing but, rebels, but at the same time, they want the same things that we do. They want to address their quality of life. They want to live in a stable household. They want protection for themselves. They actually want to work with the police, which is crazy because I was at a town hall meeting and a few of them said that I do want to become a law enforcement officer. And I had to step back for a minute, like, are you serious? He said, no, I do. Like, I believe that what they do is really helping out the community, but they can do it from a different cultural standpoint. And I think the biggest thing is that the youth want to be on a more digital platform scale, but for order us to create that platform for them, we have to allow them to have certain seats at the table. We have to allow them for them to have certain conversations with us to kind of figure out what are their needs and how can we address them and what does joy look like for them and what we can be able to do to not just really connect with them mentally, but emotional and spiritually as well too. Because the biggest things that sometimes the youth don't understand is that they're afraid to talk in front of us because what they think that we're going to say, we're going to use it against them. So we have to build that trust and vulnerability factor for them to allow them to talk about their fears and talk about their concerns, and also be able to understand what does public trust look like. And I feel like in government, we have to start showing up differently. We have to be able to start showing up differently so we can able to professionalize the field so that everyone wins. And by doing so, youth can really see the true essence and substance of that, what we're trying to create. So during the time that we're able to market ourselves correctly, we're able to go on a platform and talk about what the youth want to see, and also pass the baton off for them to be the next generation of leaders as well.
That's right. Go ahead, Courtney.
I think one of the things that we took a hold of in Baton Rouge is youth-led and driven campaigns. When we were building our community safety plan, we empowered a set of youth fellows, and we created stipends for them to be at the table and be in the room with our community stakeholders who were drafting our plans. And the young people just kept offering, this doesn't look and feel like us. Why do I have to meet you where you are versus you meeting us if this is for us? So what we did there is really empowered their voice in our strategies and solutions. We have a summer activity called the Summer of Hope, 15 weeks from Memorial Day to Labor Day, where we're out in the community, block parties, all these different things, where we do grants, where all of our partners engage in different activities. And we realized that while we had that messaging, there was nothing for young people. So we engaged in the things that they like. They like bucket hats, they like t-shirts, they like water bottles, they like these things. So in creating the surveys empowered by young people, we have this initiative called the Peace Pit, which is like a bodega or a marketplace or a store that pops up in their neighborhood to be able to connect with them. They're able to share what they're experiencing, sharing their voices, and they get merch in return because they're not gonna do it for free. So they get the merch to carry those messages, but the biggest piece that has been the most impactful for us is we basically curate their voice. They're able to take photos, they do video interviews, they host the moment and experience. So we have youth that are typically seen as negative, as D'Angelo shared, and they're saying, welcome to my hood. Let me show you what we're experiencing, and it's through their lens. And that's one of the biggest things for us that has been more successful in engaging young people. Another piece for us with the digital experience is you have to take it from the digital world to real life. Being able to share those narratives in both spaces, being able to openly talk about everything that's happening within your community, and giving young people both sides, because we've learned that they don't want your opinion. They want to know the full gamut and form their own opinion. That's tough for government because we always have a position, right? We always have a position on the topic. So we were very grateful that our mayor allowed us to talk about all sides in a space for Safe, Hopeful, Healthy, so that way young people could form their own opinions. And we created a table for them through our public safety ecosystem meeting. Once a month, we invite them all to the table. You know, we'll have food, we have people that will pick them up to come to the meetings and to be able to share that information. So we are trying to find ways to capitalize on that more and to engage more, and then also give the power to young people for our Peace Over Everything movement, which is more youth-focused and youth-driven based on their own feedback. They didn't want to align to Safe, Hopeful, Healthy. They wanted to align to their own thing. So creating space for them and then also honoring their voice through action keeps them at the table.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Jami, I'm coming to you next with a question about, I'll frame it this way and saying, okay, so we are, in our work, changing narratives, right? We are changing core beliefs, and that takes many years. It takes a lot of stories, and as you said earlier, it's trees in the forest, right? Planting a lot of trees in that forest. But that progress can be impacted when crisis emerges, right? And that crisis, you know, city by city, is not just shooting, it's when there are many shootings, or when, you know, their workers die, or when, like, there's a whole host of things that spike people's attention on the issue. And I wanted to, as an advocate, as an organizer, talk about what that impact looks like, especially in the context of advocacy.
Thanks. So the example I want to share, so I will start with the bottom line, which is as an organizing community, broad organizing community, we have to be prepared, because we know these moments will happen, and we have to be ready. We have to be ready to call in, pitch things, and speak so that it's not the dominant media narrative that takes over when crisis happens. And so an example I want to share involves like some dear partners of ours. I see Lisa sitting over in the room. That happened, so March will be a year. This past March was a year ago that the Patterson Healing Collective team lost a dear brother of theirs, Najee Seabrooks, in a police-involved shooting. He was in a mental health crisis. He called for help. And even though that help was both police help and Patterson Healing Collective members there outside, police would not allow them to engage. And so police ultimately engaged and they took his life. And because there is first of all, a table, there's a New Jersey Violence Intervention and Prevention Coalition, there's a space that could be activated right away when this happened. Because there's relationship and partnership, it allowed us to be responsive in real time when that happened. And so with Lisa's leadership and through the New Jersey Violence Intervention and Prevention Coalition, the first statement that came out after Najee was killed by the police was the one from the coalition. And by getting their statement out before the police statement, it could frame who he was as a person, first of all, because so much of the ways these things are reported completely dehumanize the people who are impacted by this violence. So it could frame who he was, it could frame what happened, and being able to be ready and be responsive in real time allowed for the coverage of that very tragic incident, the following coverage of it, to have a very different frame. It was a very different frame that centered who he was and what had happened. And then it allowed, again, because there was a platform and a place, and just right away, and just incredible leadership. I have to acknowledge Lisa's just incredible leadership of her team and of a statewide organization that not only brought in there's so many people here in this room who showed up to support the Patterson Healing Collective, but even beyond the state of New Jersey, who showed up to support in the advocacy that came out of it. And so just in January, the state of New Jersey passed the Seabrooks Washington Community-Led Crisis Response Act, which now pilots a crisis response that is a behavioral health approach instead of policing, in the name of Najee Seabrooks and Andrew Washington, who Andrew Washington also lost his life in a police killing during a mental health crisis in August of the same year. So I just wanted to share the example that, and the call for us to continue to be ready, because one thing I think about all the time when I think about an incident happens and what the police report is gonna say is I think about George Floyd, because the police report, I don't know how many people went and actually read the official police report, said that it was a medical incident that took his life. And had there not been cameras and brave people willing to share, that's all we ever would have known, was that a man lost his life after a medical incident in a police interaction. That is what it said. We have to be ready to plant the right trees and tell the truth about what's happening.
Thank you so much. I'm being told we have 5 minutes left. I can't believe this time has gone by so quickly, and I have so many more questions. But so I'm gonna try to fold in 2 questions into one. You can respond to either one, but I want to hear from each one of you. So the first part is like, how do we know narratives are changing? Like what, Jami, you offered an example of, and through an advocacy campaign, laws can change, right? If we can change the narrative, we can frame a narrative a certain way. How do we know they're changing? What are some of the signals that you notice on the ground? And what resources are available to any of us to tell our story? How do we ensure we're amplifying the work happening on the ground? And what if there are those resources, let us know. If not, what do we need in order to make that happen?
Sure, so I can chime in. I think narratives start to change when individuals personally start to rewrite their story and start to define themselves or who they are for their future. And that's either to change in their cues, their old habits, but really their behaviors and their patterns on how they start to see things that they didn't understand things growing up. And I think that's really tapping into their reconstructive past, their perceived future, and also what they want to see internally in themselves to define the chapters in their story to keep them thriving. And one of the things that I have noticed when you start to see people's narratives start to change is they start to act different. They start to talk different. To use certain language that you never heard before, but at the same time, they're still them. And at the same time, they're coming to you for reinsurance. They're coming to you from a place of joy, but also from a place of empathy and sympathy, because what they was taught earlier down their past, they have understood that that was something that was normalized to them, and that was something that they were so desensitized to that now they're seeing it from a CVI perspective point of view. And I think the biggest things that sometimes we kind of have to come to the realization to when we start to see people's narratives change is that we can't be hesitant with it. We have to accept it, because all of our narratives are different. Our personal narratives are different. Our community narratives are different. Our government narratives are different, but all similarity is how we define each other and how we define ourselves to show that the positive side that we're trying to create isn't negative and no more. Because I think a lot of people's narratives are filled with doubt and filled with fear. And we cannot have no more doubt and fear put into ourselves anymore. Because when I got involved in this work and I was trying to understand my narrative and understand my niche, you know, people call me the baby deputy director because I had a clean face. And my narrative is like, well, I'm a grown man, I'm not a baby at all. But at the same time, I'm still trying to get the work done. But I had to kind of explain from my point of view of what my narrative was for people to understand the person who I wanted to be. And I think that now they see I carry myself a little bit differently. They understand that the work ethic that I'm trying to do, and that's the same thing that goes into the community, because you have to be mindful of their surroundings. A lot of people in the community have already scripted a narrative that nothing's going to change, nothing's going to happen, things are going to be the same how they always are. But once you start to reinforce more positive solutions and you start to put more positive messaging into a neighborhood, into a community itself, that's when their narrative starts to change, and they start to see things more differently. That's when movement building starts to happen, thought partnership starts to happen, capacity building starts to happen. People saying good morning to one another, they high-fiving each other when they come up and they wake outside. And when you typically see that, that's when you know that the work that you're doing is grounded and is structured, and you start to see more effective change happen. But you have to continue to keep doing that, because narrative changing isn't linear. You know, it's not on a straight line. There's going to be some zigzags here and there. There's going to be some setbacks. But as you continue to keep doing the work and you to continue to keep shedding your light and your resources and services on one another, that's when other people's stories starts to change, and that's when they start to define their chapters in their life for them to have a positive and successful longevity and attitude towards themselves and to the others that they interact with.
I think for Baton Rouge and honestly some of the other cities that I've seen too, the narrative shift belongs to community, but you start to see the small wins. I think a lot of times we're so stuck on our data and our metrics, so I had so much appreciation for the qualitative conversations that happen in these segments today, because the stories will also tell you the progress. And what I mean by that are a few things. Number one, you know, Baton Rouge has had some hectic storylines that have come in the last few years. We had some law enforcement engagements around strip searches and things of that nature, and our community said, can we increase trauma to trust? And to hear them call a program by name that we've invested and supported with EJUSA, that let us know that things were working, that people were actively wanting to work within that space. When we start to see different people in our community with lived experiences come to the table and now trust that this ecosystem we've created makes sense. The advocates who were saying this is just another government ploy to give dollars to certain organizations, now one, apply for grants, give kudos to the works. Those are things that we would never track in a data report. But when you see those things happen, it comes together. And then for us, it's also our legislative partners also now not challenging CVI work against law enforcement, saying that we have to have either or, but trying to figure out a way to do a both and. And for us, law enforcement saying, hey, we need community leaders at the table, and our stakeholders being invited to be a part of law enforcement conversations lets us know as well. But those aren't things that are necessarily trackable, but it lets you know that the narrative is changing.
Thank you so much. All right, Jami.
I know we're short on time, so I would just say, one, that everyone in here is a narrative organizer, right? Like everyone in here has the ability to tell the stories of this work. I don't think we get outside the choir enough. We all know about this work, but there's so many people, we could go outside on the street and they would not know what we mean by CVIPI. What is that? What is community violence intervention and prevention? So we got to tell the stories, tell our families, tell our friends, use your social media. Sometimes we're so busy doing the work, we don't tell anyone about the work. So, tell about the work, help people know that there's something else that we can do in response to violence than our traditional solutions of police, prosecute, and prison.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I want to just give, as a closing, a thank you to our panelists.